Step away from the gate, or I call the police." The voice didn't just echo across the driveway, it sliced through the morning air like a verdict already decided, and for a second the world seemed to pause right there at the edge of wrought iron and judgment. Malcolm Hayes didn't move. He stood exactly where he was, 6 feet 2 inches tall, hands relaxed at his sides, wearing a charcoal hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers that had seen more boardrooms than sidewalks, but none of that mattered, not to the two security guards staring at him like he was a problem waiting to be removed. The gate behind them stood 12 feet high, matte black steel lined with cameras that tracked motion with clinical precision, a system designed to recognize every authorized face, every registered plate, every approved entry, except the man who owned all of it. Malcolm's eyes moved slowly across the keypad, the surveillance domes, the badge clipped to the guard's chest reading R. Keller, before settling back on the man's face. Calm, unreadable, like someone who had seen this moment before, just in different forms, different places, different uniforms. "Sir," I said, "step back." Keller repeated louder this time, shifting his stance slightly, as if authority could be reinforced by volume alone. The second guard, younger, maybe late 20s, glanced between them, unsure, but still aligned, arms folded tight across his chest. The driveway stretched behind the gate in a long curve of polished concrete leading up to a modern estate perched on 5 acres of manicured land, glass, stone, and quiet wealth, the kind of place that didn't need to announce itself, because everything about it already did. Malcolm took a breath, not deep, not dramatic, just enough to settle the space inside him where frustration could have lived, but didn't, because this wasn't new, not really, not the tone, not the assumption, not the certainty that he didn't belong. He had seen it at 23 in a downtown office lobby when a receptionist asked if he was there for maintenance, at 27 when a bank teller triple-checked his ID while letting the man behind him walk through with a nod, and now here again years later, standing at the gate of a $12 million property legally documented under his name and still somehow invisible to the system built to protect it. "I live here," Malcolm said finally, his voice even not raised, not defensive, just stated like fact. Keller didn't blink, didn't hesitate, didn't even look at the screen beside him that could have confirmed it in seconds. "No, you don't," he replied flatly, and something in the air shifted, not louder, not sharper, just heavier, like the moment had crossed a line it couldn't uncross. The younger guard let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but stopped himself halfway. "Residents use registered vehicles or biometric access," Keller continued. "You're neither, so you need to leave." Malcolm's gaze flickered briefly to the camera mounted above the gate, the small red indicator light blinking steadily, recording everything, timestamping every word, every gesture, every assumption. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear, then looked back at Keller. "You didn't check the system," he said, not accusing, not emotional, just precise. Keller's jaw tightened. "I don't need to check anything. I can see what's in front of me." And there it was, not policy, not protocol, not procedure, just perception. The younger guard shifted his weight, now less certain than before, glancing again at the console mounted beside the gate, a tablet-sized interface displaying access logs and camera feeds. Malcolm noticed the hesitation, but didn't press it. He simply stood there, anchored not by defiance, but by certainty, the kind that doesn't rush because it doesn't have to. A delivery van rolled slowly down the street. Behind him, engine humming low, the driver, a woman in her 30s, leaned slightly out her window, eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. A black man at the gate, 2 guards blocking him, the subtle tension that didn't need explanation. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt, just watched, and in that quiet observation something began to shift beyond the gate, beyond the driveway, beyond the immediate moment, because witnesses change things even when they say nothing. Keller stepped forward, half a step, closing the distance just enough to assert control without crossing into anything overt. "Last warning," he said, "step away or I escalate this." Malcolm's expression didn't change, but his eyes did, not in anger, not in fear, but in clarity, like a switch had been flipped somewhere deep inside him. Not a reaction, but a decision. He reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately, pulling out his phone, not as a threat, not as a shield, just as a tool. Keller exhaled sharply. "You go ahead, call whoever you need. It's not changing anything." Malcolm glanced at the screen once, then lifted it to his ear. "They've blocked access at the main gate," he said quietly. "Run a live check on entry logs and personnel decisions for the last 10 minutes. His tone didn't rise, didn't sharpen. It carried the weight of someone used to being heard on the other end of the line. There was a pause, just a fraction of a second. Then a voice responded, crisp, efficient, barely audible. to anyone else. Confirmed, Mr. Hayes, pulling records now. Keller frowned the name, not landing. Not yet. The younger guard's eyes flicked to Malcolm, then to Keller, uncertainty growing like a crack in glass. Malcolm lowered the phone, but didn't put it away. His gaze returned to the gate, the steel, the sensors, the system that had just failed its most basic function: recognition, not of a face, not of a code, but of truth. The delivery driver behind him shifted in her seat, pulling out her own phone, not to record, not yet, just to be ready, because something about the stillness in Malcolm's posture suggested this wasn't ending the way it started. Keller crossed his arms, now defensive in a way that hadn't been there before. "You're wasting your time," he said, but the confidence had thinned just enough to notice Malcolm didn't respond immediately. He let the silence sit, let it stretch, let it reveal what words couldn't, because silence in the right moment isn't absence, it's pressure. Then he spoke again, softer than before, almost reflective. "You know what's interesting," he said. "This system logs everything, every decision, every override, every time someone chooses judgment over verification." Keller scoffed, but didn't interrupt. Malcolm's eyes met his directly, now steady, unwavering. "So this isn't about whether I belong here," he continued. "It's about why you decided I don't." The younger guard looked down at the console again, this time longer, his finger hovering near the screen, as if considering checking something he should have checked already. Keller noticed and snapped, "Don't touch that, we've already handled it." Handled it. The words hung in the air like a conclusion that hadn't earned itself. Malcolm's phone vibrated once in his hand. He glanced at it briefly, then back up. "They're reviewing it now," he said simply. Keller's brow furrowed. "Reviewing what?" Malcolm slipped the phone back into his pocket, his posture unchanged, his voice calm as ever. "Everything." And for the first time since the gate closed, the certainty on Keller's face faltered, not completely, not dramatically, just enough to suggest that somewhere beneath the surface something had started to move, something he couldn't see, couldn't control, couldn't dismiss. The red indicator light above the gate continued blinking, steady, constant, recording a moment that was no longer just about access, but about something deeper, something older, something that had followed Malcolm Hayes into rooms he built, into spaces he owned, into systems he designed, and still somehow found a way to question him at the door. And Malcolm stood there, not angry, not loud, not demanding, just present, just certain, just waiting, because he knew something the gate didn't, the system didn't, and the men standing in front of him definitely didn't. This wasn't the moment he proved who he was. This was the moment they revealed who they were. And somewhere inside the estate, beyond the curve of the driveway, beyond the glass and stone, a system had already begun to respond, not to a face, not to a voice, but to a truth that couldn't be denied much longer. The silence did not break, it stretched like tension pulled tight across the steel bars of the gate, until even the quiet hum of the security system felt louder than it should. Keller shifted again, this time less certain than before, his eyes flicking toward the console as if the machine might confirm what his instincts could not. The younger guard finally spoke, his voice lower, careful. "Maybe we should just run his name real quick." Keller snapped back immediately. "Too fast, too sharp. I said it is handled." But the word handled no longer carried weight. It sounded like something already slipping. Malcolm noticed the shift, not in their posture, but in their timing, the hesitation between words, the extra second before a response, the way certainty had started to ask permission from itself. He had seen it before, not just in moments like this, but in boardrooms when decisions built on assumption began to collapse under evidence. He did not push, he did not repeat himself. He simply stood there, letting the system he trusted more than opinion do what it was designed to do. His phone buzzed again, once short, precise. He glanced down, reading the message without expression, then slipped it back into his pocket. "They are pulling your access logs now," he said calmly, not as a threat, not as a warning, just as information. Keller let out a small laugh, but it lacked conviction. "You think someone is checking on me right now?" Malcolm's eyes did not leave his. "I know they are." The younger guard swallowed slightly, his gaze dropping again to the screen where a small notification icon had just appeared, blinking once, then twice, as if asking to be acknowledged. Keller ignored it deliberately, choosing not to see what was right in front of him, because seeing it would mean reconsidering everything that had already been said. Behind them, the driveway remained empty, the estate silent, but not unaware. Inside, systems were running lines of code, tracing decisions, mapping actions against protocols, every second documented, every choice recorded, not for punishment, but for clarity. The delivery driver shifted in her seat again, this time stepping out of the van slowly, her phone now visible in her hand, not raised, not recording yet, but ready she leaned lightly against the door, watching with the kind of focus that comes from recognizing a moment before it becomes something bigger. Malcolm noticed her presence without turning his head. Witnesses always mattered, not because they changed the truth, but because they confirmed it out loud when needed. Keller finally glanced at the console, just for a second, and that was enough. The notification had expanded into a system prompt requesting confirmation of a manual override decision made less than 2 minutes ago. His override, his call, his judgment replacing verification. He looked away quickly, as if the screen had said something it was not supposed to. The younger guard saw it, too, his voice quieter now. That was not there before. Keller's jaw tightened. System glitch, he replied, but even he did not believe it. Malcolm took a step closer, not aggressive, not invading, just enough to close the distance between assumption and reality. You had one job here, he said, his voice still level. Verify before you deny. Keller met his gaze again, this time without the earlier confidence. And you had one job too, he shot back. Follow access protocol. Malcolm nodded once, slow, deliberate. I did, he said. You just chose not to recognize it. The younger guard exhaled, looking between them as if caught in a space that no longer had a clear side to stand on. The notification on the console changed again, now displaying a request for immediate review. Flagged by Central Operations. The words were simple, but their meaning was not routine. Audit in progress. Keller stared at it longer this time, unable to ignore it completely. Who are you calling? He asked, finally, the question coming out more cautious than confrontational. Malcolm did not answer right away. He let the question sit in the air the same way he had let everything else sit, giving it space to reveal its own weight before responding. The people who built this system, he said, and that was the first moment Keller truly paused, not reacted, not resisted, just paused, because something in that sentence did not fit the narrative he had constructed. The younger guard stepped slightly to the side, giving himself a clearer view of Malcolm, as if trying to match the man in front of him with something he could recognize, something he should have recognized earlier. The delivery driver took another step forward, now standing a few feet behind Malcolm, her voice soft but clear. You might want to check that screen again, she said, not accusing, not involved, just observing. Keller did not respond to her, but his eyes moved back to the console, almost against his will. The system prompt had updated again, this time displaying a name in small, clean text, awaiting confirmation. Malcolm Hayes, owner-level clearance required for override cancellation. The words did not shout, they did not flash, they simply existed, and that was enough. The younger guard read it first, his eyes widening slightly. As the information settled in Keller, he said quietly, you need to look at this. Keller did not want to. He hesitated for a fraction of a second longer before finally turning his head fully toward the screen, and when he really saw it, something shifted, not dramatically, not instantly, but undeniably. His posture changed, his shoulders lowering just enough to suggest that the ground beneath his certainty had moved. Malcolm watched him, not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with the calm of someone who had expected this moment from the beginning, because the truth does not rush, it arrives exactly when it is ready, and when it does not need to argue. Keller swallowed once, his voice no longer sharp, no longer loud. That could be anyone's name in the system, he said, but the words sounded thinner than before. Malcolm tilted his head slightly, the same quiet gesture from earlier. Then verify it, he replied, and this time there was no edge in his tone, no challenge, just a simple instruction. The younger guard reached toward the screen, his finger hovering for a second before pressing the confirmation prompt. The system responded instantly, not with noise, not with alarm, but with access logs expanding across the display, timestamps, camera feeds, entry permissions, all aligned, all consistent, all pointing to the same conclusion. Malcolm Hayes was not an intruder, not a mistake, not a question. He was the answer. Keller stared at the screen longer, now his reflection faintly visible in the glass overlay, as if the system was not just showing him data, but showing him himself. The delivery driver let out a quiet breath behind them, not relief, not surprise, just recognition of something that had already been clear. Malcolm did not move, he did not step forward, he did not claim anything. He simply stood there as the system corrected what assumption had distorted, and for the first time since the gate had closed, the space between them was no longer filled with judgment, it was filled with realization, and that changed everything. Even before a single word was spoken, Keller did not speak right away. The words he had been so quick to use minutes ago now seemed stuck somewhere between his chest and his throat. His eyes stayed locked on the screen, as if looking longer might change what it said, but the system did not blink, it did not hesitate, it did not soften its Conclusion: Malcolm Hayes, owner level clearance. The younger guard stepped back half a pace, not out of fear, but out of recognition, like someone realizing they had been standing in the wrong place all along. The air shifted again, not sharp, not loud, but heavier with truth. Keller finally turned his head slowly back toward Malcolm, his voice lower, now stripped of the edge it once carried. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" The question landed wrong, not because of what it asked, but because of what it assumed. Malcolm's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened just slightly, not anger, not pride, just clarity. "I did," he said simply. "You decided it did not matter." The words settled into the space between them, heavier than anything raised voices could have carried. The delivery driver behind him let out a quiet breath, almost a soft laugh under her breath, not mocking, not amused, just acknowledging what had been obvious from the start. The younger guard glanced at Keller, then back at Malcolm, his voice careful now. "Sir, I think we should open the gate." Keller did not respond immediately, his gaze flicking once more to the console, as if hoping for some technical explanation, some error, some glitch that could pull him back into certainty. But there was none, only logs, timestamps, confirmations, a record of every second. He chose assumption over verification. Malcolm stood still, not pressing, not stepping forward, not claiming space that was already his, because he did not need to. The system had already spoken, and it spoke in a language that did not bend for opinion. Keller exhaled slowly, then reached toward the console, his hand pausing just above the control panel, the same hesitation Malcolm had seen in executives before signing documents they did not fully understand, or in managers before admitting mistakes they could not undo. The younger guard watched him closely, waiting for a decision that now carried more weight than before. The delivery driver shifted her stance, leaning slightly forward, her attention fixed on the moment, like someone watching the final seconds of something that had already been decided. Keller pressed the button. The gate did not open, not immediately. Instead, the system required confirmation. Owner override detected, verify action. Keller's hand froze again, his reflection faint in the screen, as if the system was asking him one last time to acknowledge what he had denied. Malcolm's voice came calm, steady. "Go ahead," he said, not as permission, but as inevitability. Keller swallowed, then pressed confirm. The gate released with a soft mechanical sound, not dramatic, not loud, just precise, the steel panels sliding apart inch by inch, revealing the long driveway beyond the estate, finally accessible, not because of a command, but because of recognition. The younger guard stepped back fully, now giving space where there had been none before. The delivery driver straightened slightly, her posture easing as the tension in the air began to dissolve. Malcolm did not move immediately. He looked at the opening gate, then back at Keller, his gaze steady, not accusing, not triumphant, just present. "This was never about access," he said quietly. "It was about judgment." Keller's shoulders dropped slightly, the weight of that sentence settling in deeper than any system alert could. The younger guard nodded faintly, almost to himself, as if understanding something beyond the moment. Malcolm took a step forward, now slow, deliberate, crossing the threshold that had been denied to him minutes earlier. The ground did not change, the air did not shift, but the meaning of the space did. The delivery driver watched him pass, then glanced at Keller, her expression unreadable, before turning back toward her. Then she did not need to say anything. The moment had already said enough. Malcolm stopped just inside the gate, not turning back completely, but enough to speak without raising his voice. "You had the tools," he said. "You just chose not to use them." Keller did not answer. He could not because he lacked words, but because none of them would change what had already been recorded. The younger guard looked down briefly, then back up, his voice quiet. "I am sorry, sir." Malcolm acknowledged him with a slight nod, not as forgiveness, not as dismissal, just recognition of the difference between awareness and denial. Keller remained still, his silence heavier now than any command he had given earlier. Malcolm continued walking up the driveway, each step measured, not rushed, not delayed. The estate ahead reflecting the same quiet control he carried within him. Glass walls catching the morning light, clean lines stretching across the landscape, everything built with intention, everything designed to function without question. Unlike the moment that had just unfolded behind him, the gate continued closing slowly after him, the steel panels sliding back into place, not as a barrier, but as a boundary restored. The system reset, the error corrected, but the record remained. Every decision, every delay, every assumption logged, not erased, not forgotten. Malcolm's phone vibrated again. This time, he answered before it rang twice. "I saw it," he said, his voice low. Pull the full report. I want every override decision flagged and reviewed. The voice on the other end responded immediately. Already in progress, Mr. Hayes, we have identified 3 prior incidents with similar patterns. Malcolm's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed slightly, not in surprise, but in confirmation. Then this is not an incident, he said. It is a pattern. He ended the call without another word, slipping the phone back into his pocket as he continued toward the house. Behind him, Keller still stood at the gate, the console screen dimming back to its idle state, the younger guard beside him silent, now both of them facing a reality that had shifted without raising its voice. And as the gate sealed shut once more, the space it protected felt different, not because of the structure, not because of the system, but because of what had just been revealed at its edge. Malcolm Hayes did not need to announce who he was. The system did that for him. But what mattered more was what the moment had exposed: a failure, not of technology, not of protocol, but of perception. And as he walked further into the property, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of consequence waiting to unfold. The house did not greet him with noise. It greeted him with silence, the kind that only comes from spaces built to reflect control, not chaos. Malcolm Hayes walked through the front entrance without slowing his steps, the glass doors recognizing him instantly sliding open, without question, without hesitation. The same system that had denied him minutes ago now adjusted itself with perfect accuracy. Inside, the air felt cooler, not because of temperature, but because of intention. Every detail placed, every line measured, every surface designed to function exactly as expected. And for a brief second, Malcolm paused, not to admire it, but to recalibrate the difference between a system that works and people who choose not to. He set his keys down on the marble console near the entryway, the sound soft but precise, echoing just enough to mark his arrival. The wall to his right illuminated automatically, displaying a series of live feeds from across the property, the gate, the driveway, the perimeter cameras, all still running, all still recording. And there it was, the moment replaying in real time. Keller standing at the console, the younger guard beside him, the delivery driver stepping back into her van, the gate closing again, not as a barrier, but as a correction. Malcolm stepped closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing slightly as he watched, not the denial, not the confrontation, but the hesitation. The exact second Keller chose not to verify, the moment where protocol was replaced by perception, that was the part that mattered, that was the fracture point. He reached up, tapping the screen, once isolating the footage, zooming in on the console interface, the timestamp, clear, the override decision logged, and then the delay, 3 seconds long, not long enough to seem intentional, but long enough to reveal everything. His phone vibrated again. He answered without looking away. "Talk to me." His voice calm, but sharper now. The voice on the other end responded immediately. "We have completed the preliminary scan, Mr. Hayes. There are 3 additional flagged incidents within the last 60 days, all involving manual overrides at the gate, all involving denied access without verification." Malcolm exhaled slowly, not surprised, not shocked, just confirmed. "Same personnel?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Keller authorized all 3. The second guard was not present in those cases. Malcolm nodded once to himself, his gaze still fixed on the screen. "Pull the audio logs as well. I want tone, not just action." There was a brief pause, then, "Understood." The call ended and Malcolm remained standing there watching the replay again. But this time, it was not about the gate, it was about the pattern, because patterns do not hide, they repeat until someone decides to see them, and Malcolm had built his entire career on recognizing patterns others ignored. He turned away from the screen, walking deeper into the house, the open floor plan stretching out ahead of him, the living space framed by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the property. Beyond, everything quiet, everything controlled, everything functioning the way it was designed to function. Unlike the moment at the gate, he moved toward the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water, not out of thirst, but out of habit, the simple act grounding him in a space where nothing questioned his presence. He took a sip, then set the glass down, carefully, his reflection faint in the polished surface of the counter, and for a moment, just a moment, his mind shifted, not forward, not backward, but inward, to a memory he did not need to revisit, but understood he had to. He was 21, standing outside a gated apartment complex in Atlanta, wearing a press shirt, holding a folder of documents for a leasing appointment. The security guard had looked at him once, then twice, then asked if he was delivering something. Malcolm had explained calmly, clearly, that he had an appointment. The guard had nodded slowly, then said residence. Only Malcolm had stood there, then, just like now, not arguing, not raising his voice, just waiting for the system to correct itself. But back then the system did not correct itself, it stayed closed, and he had walked away not defeated, not broken, but aware that access was never just about keys or codes. It was about perception, and perception did not always follow truth. The memory faded as quickly as it came, not lingering, not pulling him backward, just reinforcing what he already knew. This was not new, this was not isolated, this was a continuation, and that meant it required more than a simple correction. It required a response. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message, not a call. He glanced down, reading quickly. Audio logs confirm consistent language across incidents. Phrases include "you do not look like you belong here" and "access restricted." Based on visual assessment, Malcolm's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. It was the pattern, not hidden, not subtle, just repeated often enough to become invisible to those who chose not to see it. He set the phone down on the counter, his mind already moving ahead, not reacting, not rushing, but aligning the pieces into something actionable. Because that was the difference between frustration and power. Frustration reacts, power responds. He walked back toward the wall display, tapping the screen again, bringing up a different interface, this one not for surveillance, but for control. The administrative panel of the entire security system, every access point, every personnel record, every override decision, all connected, all traceable. His fingers moved quickly, but precisely, navigating through layers of data until Keller's profile appeared on the screen. Years of service, certifications completed, performance reviews, all clean, all standard, nothing on paper that would have predicted what had just happened. And that was the problem, because paper did not record tone, paper did not record hesitation, paper did not record the moment someone chose perception over protocol. Malcolm leaned back, slightly studying the screen, then the footage, then the logs, aligning them together not as separate elements, but as a single narrative, a system designed to function, failing not because it was flawed, but because it was misused. He tapped another command, initiating a full system audit, not just of the gate, not just of Keller, but of the entire security structure, because patterns rarely exist in isolation, they exist in environments that allow them to repeat. The screen confirmed the request immediately. Audit initiated. Estimated completion time 15 minutes. Malcolm stepped away from the display again, moving toward the window, the property stretching out before him, quiet, controlled, unchanged by what had just happened at its edge. But he knew better, because spaces do not need to show damage to carry it. Sometimes the damage is in the way they are guarded, the way they are interpreted, the way they decide who belongs and who does not. He stood there for a moment longer, then spoke softly, not to anyone, not into a phone, just to the space itself. This ends today. The words did not echo, they did not need to. They settled into the room with the same quiet certainty that had carried him through the gate. And as the system behind him continued processing data, pulling logs, aligning patterns, Malcolm Hayes did not rush, did not react, did not escalate. He prepared, because what was coming next was not a correction, it was a decision. And decisions, when made with clarity, do not ask for permission. They redefine the system entirely. The system did not rush, and neither did Malcolm Hayes. He stood by the window, watching the horizon line cut clean across the sky, as the quiet hum of the audit process unfolded behind him, every second pulling more truth into the light. The screen flickered once, then stabilized, the audit reaching its first checkpoint. His phone vibrated, and this time he did not answer immediately. He let it ring once, then twice before lifting it to his ear. Status, his voice steady, the response immediate. "We have full confirmation, Mr. Hayes, for incidents total, same language pattern, same override behavior, no escalation filed in any case." Malcolm's gaze remained fixed outside, but his focus sharpened inward. "Any complaints logged?" A brief pause, then 2 informal reports, both dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Malcolm let out a slow breath, not frustration, not surprise, just alignment. "Insufficient evidence," he repeated quietly, as if testing the weight of the phrase against what he had just witnessed. "You have video, audio, and decision logs," he continued. What exactly was missing? The voice on the other end did not hesitate this time. Validation from someone with authority. Malcolm's reflection in the glass shifted slightly as he adjusted his stance. "You mean someone like me?" The silence that followed was not confusion, it was confirmation. "Yes, sir." Malcolm ended the call without another word, placing the phone face down on the counter behind him. The house remained still, but the stillness had changed. It was no longer passive, it was active, like a space preparing to respond. He turned back toward the Display the audit now. Complete the results laid out in clean, precise lines. 4 incidents, 1 pattern, repeated behavior uncorrected. His eyes moved across the data, not scanning, but absorbing, connecting each detail into a single undeniable conclusion. This was not an error. This was a system operating exactly as it had been allowed to operate. He stepped closer to the panel, his fingers hovering over the interface for a brief second, not out of hesitation, but out of precision. Then he began entering commands, not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate. Access level override, initiated personnel review, locked security clearance, reclassification, pending. The system responded instantly. Each command acknowledged, each action queued. Malcolm's phone vibrated again, this time with a direct call. He answered without looking. Carla, he said, already knowing the voice on the other end. I am here, Malcolm, her tone calm, efficient. I have reviewed the audit summary. Malcolm walked slowly along the edge of the room, his movement controlled, his thoughts already aligned. Then you know what this is, he said. Carla did not pause. Yes, I do. This is not about one decision. This is about a culture that was never corrected. Malcolm nodded once, though she could not see it. Exactly, he replied. And culture does not change with warnings. He stopped near the center of the room, his posture straight, his voice firm. It changes with consequences. There was a brief silence, then Carla spoke again. Do you want me to initiate formal review procedures? Malcolm looked toward the display again, the footage still visible. Keller standing at the gate, the moment frozen in time, not as evidence, but as clarity. No, he said. I want this handled directly. Carla understood immediately. Understood. Do you want the team assembled? Malcolm's answer came without hesitation. No team, just them. Another pause, shorter this time, sharper. You are going to address this yourself? She asked, not surprised, just confirming. Malcolm's eyes did not leave the screen. Yes, he said simply, because they did not fail a policy, they failed a principle, and that does not get delegated. Carla's voice softened slightly, not in emotion, but in recognition. Then I will prepare the termination documentation. Malcolm corrected her immediately. Prepare the documentation, but do not send it yet, he said. I want them to hear it before they read it. Carla responded without delay. Understood, it will be ready when you are. The call ended, and Malcolm remained still for a moment longer, the weight of the decision not heavy, but precise. He was not reacting to what happened at the gate. He was responding to what had been happening long before that moment. The difference mattered because reaction is temporary, response is permanent. He reached for his phone again, opening a secure channel, selecting a single contact. Keller. The name appeared on the screen, not as a person, but as a record, an entry in a system that was about to change. Malcolm pressed call. The line rang once, then connected. Keller's voice came through, uncertain, controlled. Sir. Malcolm did not waste words. Return to the main gate, he said, his tone calm, but absolute. Remain there with your team. Do not leave your post. Keller hesitated for a fraction of a second, then, yes, sir. The call ended. Malcolm placed the phone back on the counter, his movements unchanged, his breathing steady. Nothing about him suggested urgency, because urgency belongs to uncertainty, and Malcolm Hayes was not uncertain. He moved toward the front door again, the glass panels recognizing him, instantly opening. Without delay, the same system that had corrected itself once would not fail again. Not today, not now. The driveway stretched ahead of him, the path back to the gate no longer a barrier, but a line that had been crossed and was about to be redrawn. He walked with the same measured pace, each step deliberate, each movement aligned with the decision already made. The air outside felt the same, but the moment did not, because this time he was not approaching the gate as someone seeking access. He was approaching it as someone defining what access meant. The gate stood ahead, unchanged in structure, but altered in meaning. Keller and the younger guard were already there, waiting, their posture different now, not defensive, not dismissive, just aware. Malcolm did not slow as he approached. He did not raise his voice. He did not signal anything beyond his presence, because presence, when it carries truth, does not need to announce itself. He stopped a few feet from the console, his eyes moving briefly from one guard to the other, not searching, not judging, just acknowledging the space they occupied. You both understand what happened here, he said, his voice even not loud. Keller nodded slowly, his earlier certainty replaced by something quieter, something closer to recognition. Yes, sir. Malcolm's gaze held steady. No, he said calmly. You understand what you did. The distinction landed heavier than the correction. The younger guard looked down briefly, then back up, his voice low. We should have verified. Malcolm nodded once. You should have followed the system you were trained to trust. he said, then paused just long enough for the next words to settle with full weight. But you chose not to. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of consequence waiting to be spoken, and Malcolm Hayes stood there not as a man proving a point, but as a man about to make one that would not be ignored. The words did not echo, but they stayed there suspended between them like a line no one could step back across. Keller shifted his weight slightly, his hands no longer firm at his sides, but uncertain, as if they no longer knew where to belong. The younger guard stood straighter, but not with confidence, with awareness, the kind that comes too late to change what has already happened. Malcolm Hayes did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. He did not need to, because the moment had already tightened around them with a clarity that did not require force. You chose not to, he repeated quietly, and the difference between hearing and understanding settled deeper this time. Keller nodded once, but the motion lacked the certainty it had carried earlier. Yes, sir, he said, his voice lower, now not defensive, not dismissive, just reduced. Malcolm's eyes did not soften, not because he lacked empathy, but because empathy did not erase consequence. Do you know what that means? He asked, not as a challenge, but as a requirement. Keller hesitated, not because he did not know, but because saying it out loud would make it real. The younger guard spoke first, his voice careful. It means we made the wrong call. Malcolm shook his head slightly, not in disagreement, but in correction. No, he said, it means you replaced protocol with personal judgment, and then trusted that judgment more than the system designed to prevent it. The words landed with precision, not exaggerated, not emotional, just exact. Keller's gaze dropped for a moment, then returned. We were trying to protect the property, he said, and for the first time, there was something in his tone that sounded like justification. Malcolm did not interrupt. He let the statement exist long enough to reveal itself fully before responding. Protection is not guessing, he said. Protection is verifying. He paused just long enough for the distinction to settle. You were not protecting anything. You were filtering who you thought deserved access. The younger guard exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering slightly, as if the weight of the moment had finally found a place to land. Keller's jaw tightened again, but not with resistance, with realization. That was not the intention, he said quietly. Malcolm met his eyes directly. Intent does not change impact, he replied. An impact is what gets recorded. He gestured lightly toward the console, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge its presence. Every second of what happened here is documented, not just what you did, but how you did it, the tone, the delay, the decision to override verification. Keller glanced at the screen briefly, then back at Malcolm, his earlier authority now replaced with something quieter, something closer to accountability. The younger guard shifted again, his voice low. Sir, what happens now? The question did not carry fear, it carried inevitability. Malcolm's posture remained unchanged, but his presence sharpened slightly, as if the moment had reached its next phase. Now we correct it, he said simply. Keller nodded faintly, but did not speak. The younger guard looked between them, waiting. Malcolm continued, his voice steady. Correction is not an apology, it is a consequence that prevents repetition. He paused, letting the words settle, not rushed, not softened. Because if this happens once, it will happen again unless something changes. Keller's shoulders dropped slightly more now, the tension in his stance giving way to something heavier. We understand, he said, but the words sounded incomplete. Malcolm tilted his head slightly. Understanding is not enough, he replied. You understood the protocol before this happened, you just chose not to follow it. The younger guard looked down briefly, then back up, his voice quieter than before. We thought we were making the right call. Malcolm nodded once, acknowledging the statement without accepting it. That is the problem, he said. You thought instead of checking. The distinction hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The gate behind them stood closed now, not as a barrier, but as a boundary that had already been redefined. The system silent, but present, every decision still recorded, every moment still traceable. Malcolm's phone vibrated once in his pocket, but he ignored it, his focus still on the two men in front of him, because this moment was not about information, it was about clarity, and clarity does not split its attention. Look at me, he said calmly, and both guards lifted their gaze immediately, not out of fear, but because something in his tone did not allow avoidance. This is not about me, Malcolm continued. This is about every person who approaches this gate expecting to be treated based on verification, not perception. He paused, his eyes steady on Keller, then the younger guard. And today you showed that the system is not failing the people using it. Keller's breath caught slightly, not visible, not dramatic, but enough to mark the shift from defense to acceptance. The younger guard nodded faintly, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, sir. Malcolm let the silence sit for a moment. Longer, not to pressure, but to allow the truth to settle fully before speaking again. I reviewed the logs. He said this was not the first time. Keller's head lowered slightly, the acknowledgement already understood before it was spoken. No, sir. He admitted the words quiet, but clear. Malcolm did not react outwardly, but something in his stance became more defined, more final. For incidents in 60 days, he continued. Same language, same pattern, same decision, to override verification. Keller closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, his voice steady but subdued. That is correct. Malcolm nodded, once the confirmation, not changing anything, but solidifying everything. Then this is not a mistake. He said this is a behavior. The younger guard shifted again, his voice uncertain. Sir, I was not part of the other incidents. Malcolm's gaze moved to him briefly, not dismissive, not harsh, just direct. But you were part of this one, he replied. And that is enough? The distinction landed. Clean, not accusatory, but absolute. The air around them felt still again, but not the same stillness as before. This was not tension, this was resolution forming, not yet spoken, but already decided. Malcolm reached into his pocket, then pulling out his phone, not hurried, not dramatic, just precise, he unlocked it with a single motion, his eyes still on the two men in front of him. I am not here to argue what happened, he said. I am here to decide what happens next. The words did not rise, they did not need to. They carried the weight of something already set in motion. Keller stood straighter, now not in resistance, but in readiness. The younger guard mirrored him, both of them aware that the moment had crossed from explanation into consequence. And Malcolm Hayes stood there calm, controlled, unwavering, not as a man reacting to a situation, but as a man defining its outcome. And the difference between those two things was about to become very clear. Malcolm did not look down at the phone in his hand right away. He let the silence stretch one more second longer, not for effect, but for clarity, because once a decision is spoken, it cannot be taken back, and he did not speak lightly. His thumb moved across the screen, unlocking a secure line, not to search, not to confirm, but to execute. Keller watched the movement closely, his breath steady, but shallow, like someone standing at the edge of something. They could not step away from. The younger guard remained still beside him, his posture no longer uncertain, but resigned, as if he already understood what was coming before it was said. Malcolm finally lifted the phone to his ear. Carla, he said, his voice calm, but final. Proceed. There was no hesitation on the other end. Confirmed, Mr. Hayes, her tone precise. Termination documentation is ready. Do you want it issued now? Malcolm's eyes remained on Keller, then shifted briefly to the younger guard before returning again. Issue it, he said simply. The words did not rise, they did not sharpen, but they carried the weight of something irreversible. Keller's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering for a moment, not in confusion, but in realization. The younger guard inhaled slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground, as if the moment had finally reached its conclusion. The phone remained at Malcolm's ear for a second longer before he lowered it, slipping it back into his pocket. The system behind them responded before either guard could speak. The console screen illuminated automatically, displaying a new notification: access revoked, personnel status updated. The words appeared clean, precise, without emotion, without hesitation. Keller's badge clipped to his chest emitted a soft tone, not loud, not alarming, just definitive. The younger guard's badge followed the same response, both of them glancing down instinctively, as if hoping the signal meant something else, but it did not. Keller looked back up at Malcolm, his voice lower than it had been at any point before. You are terminating us right here, he asked, not in protest, but in disbelief. Malcolm met his gaze without flinching. No, he said calmly. You terminated yourselves the moment you decided the system did not matter. The distinction landed heavier than the action itself. The younger guard exhaled quietly, his shoulders dropping fully. Now the weight no longer resisted. Keller's expression shifted again, not defensive, not angry, but searching, as if trying to find a version of the moment where this ended differently. Sir, we can correct this, he said. We can follow protocol from now on. Malcolm listened without interruption, his posture unchanged, his presence steady. Correction does not come after exposure, he replied. It comes from consistency before it. He paused just long enough for the words to settle. You were consistent in your decisions, just not in the way the system requires. Keller's lips parted slightly as if to respond, but no words followed. The younger guard nodded faintly to himself, not in agreement, but in acceptance. The delivery driver, who had remained near her van, stepped closer, now not interfering, not involved, just present her eyes moving from the guards to Malcolm and back again, taking in the moment. As it unfolded, Malcolm continued, his voice even. This property is protected by a system that does not guess, it verifies, it does not assume, it confirms, and the people operating it are expected to do the same. He looked directly at Keller then. The younger guard, you did not. The statement was simple, but complete. Keller swallowed once, his voice quieter than before. We understand. Malcolm nodded, slightly acknowledging the words, but not accepting them as resolution. Understanding does not restore trust, he said, and without trust there is no position to return to. The console screen updated again, this time displaying a full access lockout system. Credentials removed, entry permissions revoked, effective immediately. Keller's hand moved instinctively toward the panel but stopped before making contact, as if the system itself had drawn a line. He could no longer cross. The younger guard stepped back half a pace, his eyes lingering on the screen. Then shifting away, Malcolm reached into his pocket again, retrieving his phone, not to call, not to confirm, but to complete the process. His thumb moved across the screen, sending a final command. The gate behind them responded instantly, unlocking and opening once more, not for access, but for exit. The steel panels sliding apart with the same quiet precision as before. Keller turned slightly toward the opening, then back to Malcolm, his voice steady but subdued. We will leave the property, he said. Malcolm did not respond immediately. He let the moment sit, letting the action speak before adding words. You will leave, he said, but what you take with you matters more than what you leave behind. Keller's brow furrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in focus. Malcolm's gaze held steady. You take the understanding that access is not determined by appearance, it is determined by verification, and if you ever stand at another gate, another door, another point of decision, you remember this moment before you make it again. The younger guard nodded slowly, his voice low. Yes, sir. Keller did not respond verbally, but his posture shifted slightly, as if the weight of the statement had settled deeper than anything said before. Malcolm stepped aside, just enough to clear the path, not as a gesture of dismissal, but as acknowledgement of what had already been decided. The two guards moved toward the opening, not rushed, not delayed, just steady. Their steps measured, their expressions quiet. The delivery driver stepped back, giving them space, her eyes following them briefly before returning to Malcolm. The gate remained open until they passed through, then closed again behind them, the steel panels sealing with the same quiet certainty as before. The system reset, the positions changed, but the record remained. Malcolm stood there for a moment longer, his gaze on the gate, not as a barrier, but as a line that had been redrawn. The console screen dimmed, returning to its idle state. No alerts, no notifications, no unresolved actions. Everything aligned, everything corrected. His phone vibrated once more. This time, he answered immediately. It is done, he said. The voice on the other end responded. Confirmed, Mr. Hayes. New personnel will be assigned within the hour. Malcolm nodded once, though unseen. Make sure they understand the system before they touch it, he said. Not just how it works, but why it works. The response came without delay. Understood. The call ended, and Malcolm remained still for a moment longer, the air around him quiet again, but different now, not tense, not uncertain, just clear, because clarity does not need to raise its voice, it only needs to be recognized. And as Malcolm Hayes turned away from the gate, walking back toward the house, the system behind him remained exactly as it was designed to be, not a barrier, not a judgment, but a reflection of the decisions made by those who stand in front of it. And this time the decision had been made correctly. The gate sealed shut behind them with a quiet finality that did not echo, but settled into the space like a line drawn and respected. Malcolm Hayes did not watch them leave for long. He turned away before the moment could become reflection, because reflection was not what this required. It required continuation. He walked back toward the house at the same measured pace, not faster, not slower, each step aligned with a system that had just corrected itself, but still needed to be redefined. The driveway stretched ahead of him, clean, uninterrupted, the estate unchanged in structure, but altered in meaning, because a space is only as strong as the decisions made at its boundaries, and today those boundaries had been tested and reset. His phone remained silent for a moment, the rare stillness after execution, when everything that needed to happen had already been set in motion. He stepped through the front entrance again, the glass doors opening without delay, without question. The interior greeted him with the same quiet precision as before, the screens along the wall still active, still displaying live feeds. The gate now empty, the console idle, the moment already archived, not erased, not forgotten. just stored where it could not be denied. Malcolm moved closer to the display, his eyes scanning the footage once more, not searching for error, not questioning the outcome, but confirming the pattern one last time, because decisions made without clarity create new problems, and Malcolm Hayes did not build systems that repeated mistakes. He tapped the screen, bringing up a broader view, not just the gate, but the entire property, every camera, every access point, every line of entry mapped out in real time. The system responded instantly, layers of data unfolding across the display like a blueprint of control. His gaze moved methodically from one feed to the next, not rushed, not distracted, aligning the present with the data he had already reviewed. The audit results remained unchanged: 4 incidents, 1 pattern, consistent behavior uncorrected, until now. He reached up again, initiating a secondary command, not for review, but for restructuring the interface, shifted immediately, new parameters appearing across the screen: verification priority, elevated, manual, override restrictions, tightened audio, logging, enhanced, each adjustment precise, each change intentional. This was not about fixing what had happened, it was about preventing what could happen again. His phone vibrated once. This time he answered without delay. Status, he said, his voice calm, the response immediate. New personnel are en route. Mr. Hayes, estimated arrival in 20 minutes. Full background clearance verified. Malcolm nodded once to himself. Make sure they are briefed before they arrive, not just on protocol, but on expectations. There was a brief pause, then understood. The call ended, and Malcolm remained standing there for a moment longer, the system in front of him now aligned with the decision behind him. The house, quiet, the air steady, everything in place, but something beneath the surface had shifted, not visible, not audible, but real, because change does not always announce itself. Sometimes it settles into the structure and waits to be tested. He turned away from the display, walking toward the living space, the floor beneath him smooth, uninterrupted, the windows ahead reflecting the property beyond, the same 5 acres of controlled space, the same long driveway, the same gate now closed again, but no longer questioned. He stopped near the center of the room, his posture relaxed, but his mind still engaged, not in what had happened, but in what it meant. Because moments like this do not exist alone, they connect to something larger, something deeper, something that does not end at a gate or a decision. His eyes moved across the room briefly, then settled on nothing in particular, and for a second the present gave way to memory, not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to remind him where this began. He was younger then, not yet a CEO, not yet an owner, just a man with a plan, standing outside a corporate building in Chicago, the glass doors in front of him reflecting a version of himself that others did not yet recognize. He had approached the front desk with the same calm, the same clarity, and the receptionist had looked at him once, then asked if he was there for delivery. Malcolm had explained his meeting, his purpose, his presence, but the question had already been asked, and that was the moment that stayed, not the denial, not the delay, just the assumption, because assumptions do not need evidence, they only need acceptance, and Malcolm had decided a long time ago he would never accept them. The memory faded as quickly as it came, not lingering, not pulling him backward, just reinforcing the structure he had built since then, a structure where systems replaced assumptions, where verification replaced perception, where access was determined by fact. Not feeling, his phone vibrated again, this time a message, not a call. He glanced down, reading quickly, briefing completed, personnel informed of updated protocols, arrival in 15 minutes. Malcolm set the phone down on the table beside him, his reflection faint in the glass surface, his posture unchanged, his expression steady. He walked back toward the window, the light outside shifting slightly as the morning moved forward, the property still quiet, still controlled, but now something else, something more defined, because clarity had replaced uncertainty, and clarity changes everything. He stood there for a moment longer, then spoke softly, not into a device, not to anyone in particular, just to the space itself. This is how it works. The words were not loud, they did not need to be, they carried the weight of a system now aligned with its purpose. He turned slightly, his gaze moving back toward the display, where the gate remained visible, the entrance point, the boundary, the place where everything had unfolded and been corrected. The screen showed nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just an empty drive, a closed gate, a system waiting for its next interaction. But Malcolm knew better, because systems do not prove themselves in calm moments, they prove themselves in moments of decision, and the next decision would come soon enough. His phone remained still now, the calls completed, the instructions given, the structure set. He did not rush, he did not anticipate. He simply stood there present, aware, ready, because readiness is not about urgency, it is about alignment, and Malcolm Hayes was aligned. The gate outside remained closed, but no longer uncertain. The system inside remained active, but no longer untested, and as the minutes passed quietly, the space between what had happened and what would happen next grew smaller, not with tension, but with expectation, because the next arrival would not just be new personnel, it would be a new standard, and standards, when set correctly, do not need to be enforced, they are followed, and Malcolm Hayes had just redefined exactly what that meant. The minutes did not drag, they aligned themselves with quiet precision. As Malcolm Hayes stood near the window, watching the property breathe in stillness, the kind of stillness that comes before something new steps into place, his phone remained silent. Now the instructions already delivered, the system already adjusted, the outcome already set in motion. Outside, the light had shifted slightly, the sun higher, now casting longer reflections across the polished driveway leading to the gate, the same gate that had just become more than an entrance, it had become a measure. Malcolm did not move immediately. He let the space settle around him, not because he needed time, but because time revealed whether a system was truly aligned or simply adjusted, and alignment does not rush, it holds steady. He turned his attention back to the wall display, the live feed from the gate. Clear, uninterrupted, the steel panels closed, the console idle, waiting for the next interaction, and then it happened, not loudly, not dramatically, just a small movement at the edge of the frame, a vehicle approaching from the far end of the road, black SUV. Clean lines, steady pace. Malcolm's eyes focused not on the vehicle itself, but on the way it approached, not hesitant, not aggressive, just measured, as if the driver understood exactly where they were going and why. The system responded instantly, cameras adjusting angles, sensors activating in sequence, the interface lighting up with recognition protocols, engaged, not guessing, not assuming, verifying the license plate, scan the data, cross-check the system, confirming clearance before the vehicle even reached the gate. Malcolm watched closely, not because he expected failure, but because he expected confirmation. The SUV slowed to a complete stop in front of the gate, not too close, not too far, exactly where the system required. The driver remained inside, hands visible, posture neutral, the console illuminated, displaying the verification sequence, step by step, license plate confirmed, facial recognition pending, identity match in progress. The process moved smoothly, each stage acknowledged, each input validated, no hesitation, no override, no assumption. Malcolm's phone vibrated. Once he did not answer, he did not need to. The system in front of him was already speaking. The gate remained closed, not as a denial, but as a checkpoint. The difference mattered because checkpoints do not judge, they confirm. A moment passed, then another. The console displayed access granted, and the gate responded immediately, opening with the same quiet precision as before, the steel panels sliding apart, not because someone decided, but because the system verified. The SUV moved forward slowly, entering the property without interruption, without question, the gate closing behind it. Once the vehicle passed the threshold, Malcolm exhaled softly, not relief, not surprise, just recognition. This was how it was supposed to work. No raised voices, no hesitation, no personal judgment, just process. Followed and confirmed. He watched as the SUV continued up the driveway, eventually coming to a stop. Near the front entrance, the driver stepped out first, a woman, mid-30s, composed posture, professional movement, precise. She did not look around for approval. She did not hesitate. She simply moved with the confidence of someone who understood the system. She was entering a second individual, exited from the passenger side, a man, slightly older, posture straight, eyes scanning, not in suspicion, but in awareness. Both of them dressed simply, not exaggerated, not understated, just aligned with purpose. Malcolm stepped away from the window, moving toward the entrance, the glass doors opening as he approached. The same seamless response, the same quiet acknowledgement. The new personnel reached the front step. Just as he arrived, the woman spoke first, her voice clear, steady. "Mr. Hayes." Malcolm nodded once, acknowledging her presence. "You are on time," he said, not as praise, not as critique, just observation. She responded without hesitation. "We were instructed to be." The answer was simple, but it carried something more, something Malcolm recognized immediately, alignment, not just with schedule, but with expectation. He stepped aside, allowing them to enter the space, the interior responding to their presence with the same quiet precision, lights adjusting temperature, holding steady, the system recognizing authorized entry. Without delay, Malcolm turned slightly, facing them fully, now his posture unchanged, his gaze direct. "You have been briefed," he said. The man nodded once. Yes, sir. Full protocol review completed prior to arrival. Malcolm's eyes moved between them, not searching, not testing, just confirming. Then you understand what happened here this morning. The woman answered, this time her tone measured. Yes, sir. Manual override used without verification, multiple prior incidents with similar patterns. Malcolm held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. And you understand why that matters, the man responded. Because the system is only as reliable as the people who operate it. Malcolm allowed a slight pause, not to create tension, but to allow the statement to settle fully before continuing. And what is your role in that? The woman answered immediately, to follow verification without exception. Regardless of appearance or assumption, Malcolm's expression remained steady, but something in his posture shifted slightly, not relaxation, not approval, just acknowledgement. This was not about hearing the right words, it was about understanding their weight. He turned his head slightly, gesturing toward the display, where the gate feed remained visible. That gate does not decide who belongs here, he said. You do, but only when you follow the system designed to remove your opinion from the process. The man nodded once. Understood. Malcolm stepped closer to the display, his hand resting lightly on the console edge. This is not a test you pass once, he continued. It is a standard you maintain every time. The woman's voice remained steady. Yes, sir. Malcolm turned back toward them fully, now his gaze direct, his tone unchanged. Because the moment you decide to trust your judgment over verification, you are no longer protecting this property, you are redefining it. The words landed clean, precise, the weight of them understood without explanation. The room remained quiet, but not empty. It held something, now something, defined something, set into place not by force, but by clarity. Malcolm Hayes looked at them both for a moment longer, then gave a single nod, not as approval, not as dismissal, but as recognition. Return to your post, he said simply. The two new guards responded immediately, turning and moving back toward the entrance. Their steps measured, their posture aligned, the system behind them continuing to function without interruption, without hesitation. Malcolm remained where he was for a moment longer, his eyes returning to the screen, the gate visible, once more closed, steady, waiting, not as a barrier, but as a reflection of the decisions made in front of it. And this time the reflection matched the design exactly. The gate returned to stillness, but it was no longer the same kind of stillness it had carried earlier. It was not passive, it was precise, the system now aligned with the people operating it. And that alignment showed itself not in noise, but in absence of friction. Malcolm Hayes remained by the display for a moment longer, watching the live feed, not because he expected failure, but because he understood that consistency reveals itself over time, not in a single moment. The new guards moved into position at the console, their posture steady, their movements controlled, no unnecessary gestures, no hesitation. The woman accessed the panel, her fingers moving with quiet familiarity, verifying status logs, checking system integrity, not because she was unsure, but because that was the standard. The man stood slightly behind her, his eyes scanning the perimeter, not in suspicion, but in awareness, each of them operating within the system, not around it. Malcolm observed without speaking, because what mattered now was not instruction, but execution, and execution does not need to be announced, it needs to be consistent. The driveway remained empty for a moment longer, the space between actions allowing the system to settle into its new rhythm. And then another vehicle approached, this one slower, older, a white pickup truck, moving cautiously. As it neared the gate, the system responded immediately, cameras adjusting, sensors engaging, the console lighting up with the same sequence as before. License plate scan initiated, the truck stopped at the designated point. The driver, a middle-aged man, leaned slightly forward, his hands visible on the wheel, his posture neutral. The woman at the console did not look at him first. She looked at the screen. Verification before observation. The system processed the plate, no match found. The interface shifted to secondary verification, request identification. The woman pressed the intercom button, her voice calm, professional. Please state your name and purpose of visit. The driver responded clearly. Name is Daniel Brooks. I am here for landscaping maintenance scheduled for today. The woman's eyes remained on the screen as she entered the information, cross-checking the schedule. The system responded quickly. Appointment confirmed, vendor access authorized for limited entry. She nodded slightly, then pressed the next command. The gate remained closed for a second longer as the system completed the final step. Access parameters set, time restricted, area restricted. Then the console displayed clearance granted. The gate opened smoothly without delay, without question. The truck moved forward at a controlled pace, entering the property. The woman watched until it passed fully through, then allowed the gate to close behind it. The entire interaction lasted less than 30 seconds. No raised voices, no hesitation, no personal judgment. Malcolm's eyes remained on the screen for a moment longer, then shifted to the guards, not to correct, not to instruct, just to acknowledge the difference, because the difference was clear, not in what was said, but in what was not said. No assumption, no filtering, no delay. The man at the console turned slightly toward the woman, his voice low but steady. That is how it should be every time. She nodded once, her focus already returning to the screen. Every time. Malcolm stepped back slightly from the display, his posture unchanged, but his presence lighter, not relaxed, not casual, just aligned, because alignment removes tension, it replaces uncertainty with clarity. He moved toward the window again, the property stretching out before him, the same 5 acres, the same structures, the same boundaries, but the meaning had shifted. The gate was no longer a point of judgment, it was a point of verification, and that distinction mattered more than anything else. His phone remained still, no new alerts, no new incidents, the system functioning as designed, the people operating it following the process, not questioning it. Malcolm stood there for a moment longer, then spoke softly, not to interrupt, not to command, just to state what was already evident. That is the standard. The words did not carry force, they carried confirmation. The woman at the console glanced briefly toward the house, then back to her screen, acknowledging the statement without breaking her focus. The man adjusted his stance slightly, his posture steady, his attention fixed on the perimeter. The system continued running quietly in the background, every movement tracked, every decision logged. But there was nothing to flag, nothing to question, because nothing was out of place. Malcolm's gaze returned to the display. One more time, the gate visible, the console active, the guards in position, everything aligned, everything functioning, and for the first time since the morning began, there was nothing to correct, nothing to adjust, nothing to confront, because the system did not need intervention, it needed consistency, and consistency had just been established. He turned away from the window, moving back into the center of the room, his steps measured, his breathing steady, the house around him unchanged in structure, but different in function, because the boundary that protected it now operated with clarity, not assumption. His phone vibrated. Once a new message, he glanced down briefly, system audit complete. All parameters updated, no further anomalies detected. Malcolm set the phone down again, his reflection faint in the surface beneath it. The message did not surprise him, it confirmed what he had already seen, what he had already decided. He walked slowly toward the display, once more his hand resting lightly against the console edge as he looked at the gate, not as a barrier, not as a checkpoint, but as a reflection of a principle that had just been reinforced, not through words, not through warnings, but through action. And as the system continued to run without interruption, without deviation, Malcolm Hayes did not need to say anything more, because the standard had been set, and for those who understood it, no explanation was required, and for those who did not, no explanation would ever be enough. The system did not celebrate, it did not announce success, it simply continued to operate. And that was the point. Malcolm Hayes stood still for a moment longer, letting the quiet precision of the moment settle into something permanent. Because permanence is not created through one decision, it is built through repetition of the right ones. His eyes remained on the display, the gate visible, the guards steady, the process intact, no deviation, no hesitation, just execution the way it was designed to be. And that was where most systems failed, not in their design, but in their use. Malcolm turned slightly, stepping away from the console, his movements unhurried, his posture unchanged. The house behind him remained still, but now it carried a different weight. Not tension, not correction, but clarity, the kind that does not demand attention, it simply exists. He moved toward the seating area near the window, lowering himself into the chair, not out of fatigue, but out of observation, because sometimes the best way to understand a system is not to stand over it, but to watch how it behaves when it believes it is no longer being watched. The live feed continued, without interruption, the new guards maintaining their positions, their actions consistent, their timing precise. Another vehicle approached, this time a rideshare sedan. The system responded the same way, cameras adjusting, sensors engaging the console. Lighting up, the woman at the station initiated the process immediately. Identification, request verification, check confirmation, complete. The gate opened, the vehicle entered and exited within moments. The interaction seamless, uneventful, exactly as it should be. Malcolm watched, not the vehicle, not the driver, But the guards, the way they moved, the way they spoke, the way they did not let assumption enter the process. And that was where the difference lived, not in the outcome, but in the method. His phone vibrated once on the table beside him. He picked it up, glancing at the screen. A message from Carla: performance logs updated, new personnel operating within full compliance, no deviations detected. Malcolm set the phone down again. The message expected, not because he assumed success, but because he recognized alignment when he saw it. And alignment does not produce surprises, it produces consistency. He leaned back slightly in the chair, his gaze still fixed on the display. The gate, now quiet again, the driveway clear, the system steady, and for a moment the silence carried something more than absence. It carried confirmation that the structure he had built, the standard he had set, the correction he had enforced was not just temporary, it was holding, and that mattered more than anything else, because temporary change is easy, permanent change requires discipline. His eyes shifted briefly toward the far end of the property, where the landscaping crew had begun their work, moving with quiet efficiency. Their presence coordinated, their access controlled, everything in motion, everything within the system, nothing out of place. Malcolm exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in recognition, the kind that comes when a system proves itself without needing to be tested again. He reached for his phone once more, this time initiating a call. Carla answered immediately. Yes, Malcolm, her voice steady. He did not waste time. Schedule a full review of all entry points, not just here, every property, every location. I want this standard applied across the board. There was a brief pause, then. Understood, I will coordinate with regional managers and compliance teams. Malcolm nodded slightly, though unseen. And make it clear. This is not a recommendation, it is a requirement. Carla's tone sharpened just enough to match his intent. It will be done. The call ended, and Malcolm placed the phone back on the table, his focus returning to the display, because what happened here was not isolated, it was representative, and representation demands expansion. He stood again, moving back toward the console, his hand resting lightly against its surface as he looked at the gate, not as a point of entry, but as a point of truth, because that was what it had become, a place where decisions revealed more than actions, they revealed intent, and intent, when left unchecked, becomes pattern. But today, the pattern had been broken, not through confrontation, not through escalation, but through clarity. Malcolm's reflection appeared faintly in the screen as he stood there, his posture straight, his expression unchanged. The same man who had been stopped at that gate earlier, the same man who had been questioned, the same man who had been denied. And yet nothing about him had changed. The system had changed, the people had changed, the standard had been reset. And that was the difference. He did not need to prove who he was. The system had already done that. What mattered now was what the system would continue to prove every time someone approached that gate, every time a decision was made, every time the line between assumption and verification was tested. The guards remained in position, their focus steady, their movements aligned. The console displayed no alerts, no flags, no deviations, just a system functioning as intended. Malcolm allowed a small pause, not to reflect, but to confirm one last time that everything held, and it did. The silence remained steady. The process remained intact, the standard remained clear. He turned away from the display. Once more his steps measured as he moved deeper into the house, the space around him unchanged, but the meaning within it different, because meaning is not in structure, it is in function, and function had just been redefined. The gate outside remained closed, but it was no longer a question, it was an answer. And as Malcolm Hayes walked forward, leaving the display behind him, the system continued to operate exactly as it should, not because it was perfect, but because it was now understood. And understanding, when paired with discipline, does not fail, it simply repeats the right decision again and again until it becomes the only decision that exists. The house absorbed his footsteps without echo as Malcolm Hayes moved further inside, not because the space was empty, but because it no longer needed to respond to tension. The moment at the gate had passed, but its meaning had not. It lingered, not as conflict, but as structure, something now embedded into the system rather than floating around it. He walked toward the central corridor, where the walls displayed framed architectural plans of every property. He owned each line, each dimension, each entry point mapped with precision and intent. He paused in front of one of them, not because it was different, but because it was identical. The same layout, the same gate, the same control point replicated across multiple locations. And that was when the realization sharpened, not new, but clearer than before. What happened this morning was not unique. It was simply visible. He reached up, lightly touching the edge of the frame, not as admiration, but as acknowledgement. These were not just Buildings, they were systems, and systems do not fail in isolation, they fail in patterns. His phone vibrated again, and this time, he answered before it completed the second ring. Report, he said, his voice calm. Carla responded immediately. Regional notifications have been sent. Compliance teams are reviewing entry protocols across all properties. Preliminary responses indicate similar gaps in enforcement, not identical, but consistent enough to require action. Malcolm nodded once to himself, the confirmation aligning with what he had already concluded. Then do not wait for reports, he said. Implement the standard now, review later. Carla did not hesitate. Understood, execution will begin immediately. Malcolm ended the call without another word, placing the phone back in his pocket as his gaze returned to the architectural plans. The lines no longer just structure, but responsibility, because what is built must also be protected, not just physically, but ethically. He turned away from the wall, moving toward his office, the door opening as he approached. Recognizing him, without delay, the interior quiet, the desk clean, the screens inactive until he stepped inside. Then they lit automatically, displaying system dashboards from multiple locations, each one reflecting a different property, a different gate, a different team. And as he looked at them, he did not see buildings, he saw decisions being made in real time, some correct, some not yet tested, but all subject to the same standard he had just enforced. He stepped behind the desk, his fingers moving across the interface, pulling up a live feed from another property in Houston. The gate they're similar in design, different in surroundings, a suburban layout instead of a private estate. The guard on duty stood at the console, his posture relaxed, his attention divided between the screen and his phone. Malcolm watched for a moment, not judging, not interrupting, just observing, and then a vehicle approached. The system responded, but slower than it should have. The guard glanced up, then back down, then finally reached for the console, a delay small, but measurable. The verification process began, but not with the same precision Malcolm had just seen earlier. There was hesitation, not failure, but inconsistency, and inconsistency was where problems began. He tapped the screen, once flagging the interaction, the system marking it for immediate review. His expression did not change, but his focus sharpened, because this was not about one location, one team, one incident. This was about a standard that either existed everywhere or nowhere. He opened another feed, this one in Miami, the gate positioned along a waterfront property. The guard there, alert, focused, the process smooth. The interaction clean, no deviation, no delay. Malcolm allowed a slight pause, comparing the two, not an outcome, but in method, one aligned, one uncertain, and that was enough to confirm what he already knew. Standards are not declared, they are enforced, and enforcement requires visibility. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes moving across the screens, each one a reflection of a decision being made somewhere else by someone who either understood the system or thought they did, and that difference mattered more than anything. He reached for his phone again, initiating another call. Carla answered immediately. Yes, Malcolm. His voice remained steady, but carried more weight now, not louder, just more defined. I want live monitoring expanded, not for control, but for accountability. Every gate, every access point. I want visibility into how decisions are being made, not just what decisions are made. Carla responded without hesitation. Understood, we will deploy additional oversight protocols and real-time review flags. Malcolm nodded once, though unseen, and make sure they understand this is not surveillance, it is structure. He said, we are not watching them, we are reinforcing the system they are responsible for maintaining. Carla's tone remained aligned. It will be communicated clearly. The call ended and Malcolm set the phone down again, his gaze returning to the screens, because the system was no longer just a tool, it was a reflection of a principle. And principles do not hold themselves, they require alignment from those who operate within them. He stood again, moving toward the window, behind his desk, the view different from the main living area, but still overlooking the property, still centered on the gate, the same gate where everything had unfolded earlier, but now it stood as something else, not a point of conflict, not a point of correction, but a point of confirmation. The new guards remained in position, their movements consistent, their focus steady, the system responding to them as designed, not because it had changed, but because they had. Malcolm rested his hands lightly against the edge of the desk, his posture relaxed, but his presence still precise, because this was not the end of the moment, it was the beginning of something larger, something that extended beyond this property, beyond this gate, beyond this morning. The pattern had been identified, the standard had been set, and now the only question that remained was whether it would hold across every location, every team, every decision. and Malcolm Hayes did not leave that to chance. He defined it, he reinforced it, and most importantly, he expected it, because expectation, when backed by action, becomes reality. And as the screens continued to display real-time decisions unfolding across different cities, different properties, different people, the system itself remained unchanged, but the meaning behind it had shifted permanently. No longer a passive structure, no longer a silent process, it had become a line that could not be crossed without consequence. And as Malcolm stood there watching not just one gate, but many, he understood something clearly. This was never about being allowed in, it was about ensuring no one else would ever be wrongly kept out again. The screens did not dim, and the systems did not slow. They continued exactly as they were designed to do, but something beneath them had shifted permanently. Malcolm Hayes stood at the window of his office, the light now higher, the day fully in motion, the same property outside, the same gate, the same structure, but no longer the same meaning, because meaning is not in design, it is in decision. And today that decision had been made clearly, without hesitation, without noise. His eyes moved once more across the monitors behind him, each one reflecting a different location, a different team, a different moment unfolding in real time. Houston, Miami, Chicago, Atlanta, every gate a line, every guard a decision, every system a mirror of what had just been corrected here. And for the first time, there was no inconsistency, not because the systems had changed overnight, but because the expectation had. An expectation, when backed by action, becomes standard, and standard, when enforced, becomes culture. His phone remained still. No alerts, no flags, no new incidents. The silence now carried something different, not tension, not anticipation, but stability, the kind that only exists when a system is no longer questioned. Malcolm turned slightly, stepping away from the window, moving back toward the center of the room. His steps measured, his presence unchanged, the same calm, the same control, the same clarity that had carried him from the moment he was stopped to the moment everything shifted. And yet none of it had required force, none of it had required volume, because real power does not announce itself, it aligns the environment around it until the outcome becomes inevitable. He paused near the desk, his hand resting lightly against the surface, his gaze returning to the primary display, the gate still visible, the new guards in position, their movements consistent, their decisions precise, not perfect, but aligned. And alignment was the point, because perfection is temporary, alignment is sustainable. He watched one more interaction unfold, a visitor approaching the system, engaging the process, following through verification, confirmed access, granted, the gate opening without delay, without question, the moment simple, uneventful, exactly as it should be. And that was the final confirmation, not the absence of error, but the presence of consistency. Malcolm exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in completion. The moment that began at the gate had now extended beyond it into something larger, something that would continue long after today, because what had been corrected was not just a decision, it was a standard, and standards do not fade, they hold, or they fail. And this one would hold. He reached for his phone one last time, not to call, not to instruct, but to document, his thumb moving across the screen, sending a single message to Carla and the compliance team. Standard confirmed in force across all locations, no exceptions. The message was short, but it carried everything it needed to. There was no need for explanation, no need for justification. The system had already spoken, and the results had already proven themselves. He set the phone down again, his reflection faint in the polished surface, his posture steady, his expression unchanged, not satisfied, not relieved, just certain, because certainty is not a reaction, it is a state built through clarity and action. He turned once more toward the window, the property stretching out before him, the same 5 acres, the same boundaries, the same gate, now standing not as a question, but as an answer. And for a moment the memory of earlier returned, not sharply, not painfully, just clearly, the voice at the gate, the assumption, the denial, the certainty that he did not belong. And then the silence that followed when the truth replaced it, not loud, not dramatic, just complete. Malcolm's gaze remained fixed outside as he spoke quietly. Not to the room, not to the system, but to the principle itself. You did not stop me at the gate, he said, his voice calm, steady. You revealed exactly why you could not stand at it. The words did not echo, they did not need to, they settled into the space with the same precision as every decision that had followed, and that was the difference. This was never about proving ownership, it was about defining responsibility, not just for himself, but for every person who would approach that gate after him, every person who would be seen not through assumption, but through verification, every person who would no longer have to question whether they belonged, because the system would answer that for them correctly. Every time Malcolm Hayes stood there for a moment, longer then turned away from the window, his steps steady as he moved deeper into the house, leaving the screens behind him, not because they were no longer important, but because they no longer required his presence. The system would continue, the standard would hold, the decisions would repeat correctly, because they had been redefined at the point where it mattered most. And as the gate outside remained closed, steady, waiting for the next approach, the next decision, the next moment of truth, it no longer represented a barrier. It represented a promise that access would not be decided by appearance, but by fact, a promise that silence would not be mistaken for submission, a promise that the system, when aligned with principle, would not fail. And in that quiet certainty, the story did not end. It stabilized, because real change does not announce its conclusion. It continues quietly, consistently, every time the gate opens. For the right reason.